My goodness was I pleasantly surprised by the Goosebumps art, because it was much creepier than I was expecting. I did not intend to go down a rabbit hole with the Wings of Fire covers from different regions, but once I started, I found it was absolutely fascinating. Also, even though this was probably technically targeted at kids, there were definitely some panels of Thorn that awakened something in me as a kid before I knew what was happening. Welcome back to Illustrator Reacts, the series that lets me write off all the comics I read on my taxes. I was feeling a bit nostalgic, so I thought I would cover some art and artists from my childhood, as well as a series that I know is from a bunch of my subscribers' childhoods, and maybe throw some other stuff in there too from the illustratorreacts@gmail.com submissions I've gotten. But let's kick things off with a series that I absolutely loved as a kid, and actually started off as a self-published series.
Hit like if you want, subscribe if you feel like, but either way, enjoy the show.
Now, as I said, Bone was originally a self-published series created by Jeff Smith, who is the author and artist. It started being released in the early 90s and ran for about 12 or 13 years, and it was actually a follow-up/reboot to some comic strips he did in the 80s about the character Thorn, who appears as the main female character in Bone. But it's most famously known for the color version of the release with colors by Steve Hamaker, published through the graphics branch of Scholastic. That's the version I read as a kid and absolutely fell in love with. That and the original run of Ultimate Spider-Man by Brian Michael Bendis and Mark Bogley were the things that got me into comics when I was a kid. And going back through the art for this series, for one, reading this story is probably technically targeted at kids, but it really is an all-ages kind of story. Like, rereading this as an adult, I wasn't just enjoying it for the nostalgia factor, it is just a well-told story. It's like an action, fantasy, comedy, adventure kind of tale. And the thing that struck me most about the art in going back to it is how simple the main characters are, which allows them to be so incredibly expressive. I mean, that's not to say detailed characters can't be expressive, but the bones from Boneville are Phone Bone, Phony Bone, and Smiley Bone, and they are basically the simplest designs you can get for a humanoid type character. They got one less finger than a regular human, their heads are basically just two round shapes, with Smiley's being a bit more of a stretched out shape for his nose being longer. And yet, even in the first few pages, you get so much character and life out of these characters, and you very quickly get a sense of what their character traits are. And another thing that I really love that struck me, I mean, the locusts that attack our main characters very early on help show that this isn't just a lazy artist. Like, Jeff Smith didn't make these characters very simple because he wasn't willing to make detailed art at points. Also, I think it's important to acknowledge that more detail doesn't inherently make your art better. In fact, sometimes it can really show off your fundamentals to use more simple designs and rendering. Then you can save the more detailed stuff for when it's actually necessary for what you're trying to tell in the story. Like, this swarm of locusts would have been a pain in the butt to draw, all those little insects. And I mean, you know, lots of them are kind of roughed in. The farther back you look, they're kind of just dots of green. But still, that itself could be a time-consuming thing for a series that looks like it's going to be pretty cartoony right from the first few pages. And then once our characters all get separated, pretty early on we get some pretty cool panels of Phone Bone just out adventuring with no text. It feels very serene. The environment he's moving through is very clear, but again, is very simply done. And the version that we're looking at too is the colored version, again, colors by Steve Hamaker. The original version of the comic wasn't colored, so even some of the details that we're seeing here in the shading wouldn't have been a part of the original. And yet it's telling the story very effectively. And again, this series started off self-published and became very successful. Granted, in the early 90s, self-publishing was a very different thing. On the one hand, it's much easier to do self-publishing now, but on the other hand, that means way more people are doing it, so there's more competition. But still, you should be able to take a series like this as inspiration for whatever you want to make, and the possibility that even if you started off self-publishing it, putting it out on Webtoons or YouTube or wherever else, you can be really successful with it. I personally tried self-publishing on Amazon about 10 years ago with a little book series called Multiverse Tales. I also used a simpler art style back then because it's what I could accomplish with consistency, even though I had ambitions of doing something much more detailed down the line. And while I didn't sell many copies of the books back then, years later I rebooted Multiverse Tales on my YouTube channel, PopCross Studios, after it had become my full-time job, and now the series has a collective 7.5 million views and still growing. It just took dedication and consistency over time to build up an audience and significantly improve my art and writing. So if I can do it, you can definitely do it too. But anyway, that was a tangent. Now back to Bone. And there's plenty of other examples in this series too of Jeff Smith showing that he is a really good artist. Like I remember, I'll find it somewhere, there's a nice page of Phone Bone is having a dream and he's on a ship and playing out a Moby Dick type situation. And we've got this perspective shot of looking up at him on the, I don't know ship terminology very well, on the mast, whatever. It's a really cool shot of looking up at him with all the ropes going up towards him, leading us to him. Jeff Smith can make really detailed art as well, but the simplicity that he used in a lot of this series probably helped him make it a lot faster and doesn't detract from the story. Also, as a final little note, even though this was probably technically targeted at kids, there were definitely some panels of Thorn that awakened something in me as a kid before I knew what was happening. But hey, it was self-published, so he had a little bit more freedom regardless of the demographic that was being targeted. But yeah, overall, Bone is an awesome series. Whatever age you are, if you haven't read it, I'd recommend giving it a shot. Now, have I ever got a web to weave here? So, Wings of Fire is not something from my childhood, but I know a bunch of my subscribers love it either now or as kids. It's a set of stories revolving around a group of young dragons, and a while back, after my audience convinced me to read it, I read the first few books and did an episode turning some of the dragons from it into superheroes. But I also knew there was a comic series of it, made through the same publishing company, Scholastic, so I thought I'll grab some of the comics and talk about that. The art's done by Mike Holmes, and I looked at it and I was just like, you know, it works, it does its job, there's some cool stuff in here. There's some nice, really menacing panels of the Nightwing dragons. There's some really cool transit shots of like a full page spread of the characters going through a scene, and I'm a big fan of those. But overall, I didn't have that much to talk about for it, so I was umming and ahhing of what to do, still wanted to cover Wings of Fire, and then I remembered the covers for the books, not the comics, done by Joy Ang, which are absolutely phenomenal, and I knew I loved those. Technically not a comic, but that's never stopped me from talking about something in this series anyway. So I decided, let's go look at the covers for Wings of Fire. And they are absolutely beautiful. I could spend so long talking about Joy Ang's work, both in this and other stuff. The dragons to me are that perfect blend of a bit cartoony, but with a nice middle ground of not realistic rendering, but not overly cartoony rendering that just feels so beautiful. Almost a little bit like the animated version of How to Train Your Dragon. It's funny that I have to specify animated. I also wish that I could find higher resolution versions of the full spread of the art that she made to cover the front, side, and back cover before the text and stuff was added, because it is absolutely stunningly beautiful. Because we're focusing on the dragons usually in the main cover version, but her environment work is beautiful as well. It's got a bit of realism in there with the clouds, but it's also stylized with like the mountains in the back there. The style she's done for the water I absolutely love. But anyway, as I was going through in awe of these covers that Joy Ang has done, I was saving some of them, and then I was also finding these as I was saving the covers. And I was like, okay, I don't know different marketing regions that well, but maybe they had some market research that said for the Chinese age demographic that we're going for in this region, these covers are going to work better. I just kind of wrote it off as whatever, but then I kept coming across them, seeing the differences between the two versions, and I felt like I had to look into it. Because on the one hand, these covers didn't strike me as good covers for the age range that they were going for. It's like a kid series / early teenagers. And as someone who's read the books, it's been a while since I read them, but I was like, I'm pretty sure the dragons as they're described just don't actually look like this. These kind of look like book covers for a fantasy series for maybe young adults, but also adults, where the dragons are the bad guys, not the heroes of the story. But also when I zoomed in on the art, I was like, okay, but there is some really high-level detailing done in these dragons. Like, the artist who's doing this clearly isn't a bad artist. But I was not a fan of these covers, and from what I was finding when I started looking into it, a lot of people in the Wings of Fire community aren't a fan of these covers either. And it turns out these are not just the Chinese market covers, these are the UK market covers as well. And that got me even more intrigued, because I wouldn't have thought the difference between the American covers and UK covers would have been that dramatic. I mean, I do know some examples of differences between book releases in those different markets. I mean, Harry Potter is probably the most famous one. Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone in the UK was released as Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone in North America. But looking at these, I was like, why did they go with such a dramatic difference? And I didn't find any specific reason why that was done, and I think now they've actually gone to the original covers in the UK as well. But I was like, okay, I have to look into this artist, because, again, this person clearly isn't a bad artist. There is some high-level rendering going on in these dragons, even if I don't love the pose or the style of the dragons. So then I went and looked into the work of Angelo Rinaldi, the artist who did these covers, and my goodness, is he phenomenal. Like, he has some absolute legend tier art. And he's clearly been around the block illustration-wise, maybe even longer than I've been alive. He's done work for beer brands, he's done whatever this Kevin Hart piece is, he's got a few of these that's beautifully painted. He did the posters for the Bat Out of Hell musical, which I saw and enjoyed. And looking at all of these, I was like, there is some incredible rendering in here, working in different styles, but usually pretty close to realism. And the one that struck me the most personally was this one with the ship and all the tentacles around it, just coming down in on this guy who's, you know, probably hopelessly trying to defend himself for his life, but the rendering on the tentacles is beautiful. The coloring of the kind of green and reddish hues on it, the shapes of them coming down and in, bringing us towards this guy as the focal point who is clearly just about to get eviscerated. This is just a stunning piece of work. So it was so strange to me, the work that he'd done on the Wings of Fire covers. Again, I couldn't find any official information on this. My guess would be that this is just what the client wanted. I mean, you can see from his other art that he could have done something very different for these covers, but this is what we got, and they were clearly happy with it because he did it for multiple different covers. It's also possible he wasn't given a description of what the dragons should have looked like, meaning they looked very different from the versions that Joy Ang drew, which I think generally speaking, Wings of Fire fans go, yeah, her version or the canonical versions of what the dragons look like. But to me, it feels like a little bit of a missed opportunity, because can you imagine with his level of rendering if they just said, hey, we do still want different covers for this region, but take Joy Ang's designs and give them the live action How to Train Your Dragon treatment. I mean, that reference wouldn't have made sense back then when these covers were being made, but can you imagine his rendering style with her designs of the dragons? Those would have been such incredible covers. I might have bought another copy of the books just to have those covers. But anyway, if you've seen the UK Wings of Fire covers before and you've been like, man, I hate these, just remember that the artist behind them is a phenomenal artist. Now, I was a big reader as a kid, and my favorite genre to read was horror. So, like a lot of people, I started off with R.L. Stine and the Goosebumps series. And, of course, as a comic book fan as well, when comics were made, again, we're in the realm of Scholastic and graphics publishing, I was super excited to read some of these, and I didn't really remember now as an adult what the art style was like when I read them back then. But I grabbed this, and I was going to look at it for this episode, and admittedly, I kind of expected the art for a kid's series to be a little bit watered down and sanitized. My goodness, was I pleasantly surprised by the Goosebumps art, because it was much creepier than I was expecting. Like, we go on to the first one, which is the Werewolf of Fever Swamp, and another thing about this, they got different artists for each one. So this whole thing ended up giving me, honestly, kind of vibes of, like, Love, Death, and Robots, the Netflix anthology series where different episodes are animated by different animation studios in very different art styles. So the first one, The Werewolf of Fever Swamp by Gabriel Hernandez, the very first page I went to, I was like, oh, this is not the kind of style I was expecting at all. I was expecting closer to something you'd see in Bone, and I don't mean that as an insult to Jeff Smith's work in Bone, there is some creepy stuff in there too, but this looks more like what I would expect from Vertigo's Sandman series or something. Like, the rendering is cool, it's not realistic, but it's more realistic than I would have expected from a series like this, and the characters aren't just generally appealing looking, like they're not made to be stereotypical, appealing, cartoony characters. The artist was clearly given free rein to work in the style he wanted to, and they're like, the character hiding out in the woods, his face is real creepy looking. And as we move farther along, I love how Gabriel Hernandez did the werewolves in this. Most of the time they're just done in full black silhouette with just their eyes and teeth showing as white, in really nice stark contrast that looks very menacing. And there's this one shot of the werewolf just choking out one of the kids, and I was like, my goodness, this is cool and really creepy. The werewolf looks awesome in this, and it genuinely looks painful. There were some really cool pages in there, and then in the next one we had The Scarecrow Walks at Midnight by Greg Ruth, and again, not the kind of style I would have expected from a Goosebumps series. There is some really cool rendering. It's a similar kind of creepy vibe to the previous artist, but definitely not the same style. And in particular, there was one panel that just really struck me. Like, there's lots of really cool stuff in here, but of this girl's face with the shadows of tree branches going over her face, that's the kind of thing that just sticks out to me as being like, the artists that were working on this were really passionate about what they were doing. This was not just like a paycheck project where Scholastic was just getting people in quickly to try and pump out some Goosebumps stuff. There is some really beautifully done art in here. So props to Greg Ruth, the other artists that were working on these, and to Scholastic for getting a nice variety of different artists in here. In the next one, we've got The Abominable Snowman of Pasadena by Scott Morse. The style is definitely much more cartoony, but it's still not like a generic cartoony. It's got some creepiness in there too, and there's some really cool pages of like the Abominable Snowman itself. There's very stark contrast in all this art. In the previous ones, there was some gray shades, whereas in this one, I think it's just all black and white all the time. And again, while personally the other artists stood out to me more, this shows that they were willing to go with a big, broad range of artists, which I really appreciate. Now, I was gonna wrap up today by talking about the graphic novel series Amulet, and maybe even a bit of Dov Pilkey, who did Captain Underpants and a bunch of other stuff, because that felt very on theme, but as I was going through their art, I realized I just didn't have that much to talk about. So instead, I popped over to illustratorreacts@gmail.com, where people have sent me some really cool high-resolution art to talk about. And one that stood out to me was art sent to me by a subscriber, Jinro Kishi, and he sent over work by Neytirix, who's someone who's been putting out drawing and speed paint videos on YouTube for even longer than I have. And one thing that I really loved about her work is how full a lot of her pieces feel. Like, the characters themselves, in a lot of cases, aren't super detailed. They do show a clear, very strong understanding of fundamental proportions and anatomy and stuff like that. But even though the characters themselves aren't super detailed, so many of these pieces felt so full because there was just so much in them in the environment. There's so much character in the environment itself. Whether there's cameras or video game consoles going on in the background, or just lots of different little creatures scattered around, or different lighting setups with lots of different lights. There's so many different things to look at in so many of the different pieces. They feel like real big fleshed out worlds. I mean, she's also got some stuff that's just like really cool individual character pieces as well, or close-up shots of characters. There's plenty of fan art stuff in here that's really cool from various different video games and whatever else. There's characters like this that I love this design. I'm assuming it's an original character. But one of the things I like most about this is something that I've gotten from just bringing back Illustrator Reacts in general. Something that's really helped me, and I hope it's helping other people, is specific points of inspiration that I've been taking from the artists I've been covering. For instance, with Kaiju number 8, I tried doing a drawing after talking about it, where I was trying to emulate the kind of movement I saw in that comic. And then I even tried emulating Ibon Coelho's Dr. Doom big splash page that I loved so much, with a very similar pose and layout, for my recent Zodiac, Angels and Demons battle scene. And in this, I think in particular, what I'm gonna want to try is some of the really cool lighting that Neytirix does, specifically in this piece, and there's another piece of a mouse that I'll pop on screen right now, where the lighting is kind of coming in and on an angle and just catching part of the character. Looking at this piece in particular with the character that his face is just like a round ball with 2 dots on it, showing like a fun contrast of detail and simplicity. But the lighting that's coming across on just the bottom of his chin and part of his shoulder, showing a really strong understanding of form and giving a really nice lighting glow on him and the character he's holding, this mermaid character, and part of the ground below him. And we've even got that original character in the background. It looks like the same character or same species or something. But I think that's something I'm really going to want to try, the light kind of cutting in on a piece partway through and across a character's body. I think that's a really cool idea, and Neytirix has done it really well in a few different drawings. And I'm excited to look into her work more, so thank you very much, Jinro. That's all I've got for you today, but honestly, I have so many episodes worth of art to talk about already lined up. I think I might even do a full episode around Marvel Rivals because the art for that is part of what inspired me to bring back this series, and I still haven't talked about it yet. But hey, we'll see what happens. If you enjoyed this episode, there's 3 new episodes in the rebooted version of it so far, and another 12 in the original version I made 5 years ago. Or you could check out some of my actual art and storytelling episodes. Fear of the Demon Hunters is a nice ongoing, kind of creepier storyline, whereas something like Starseed Psyche is more of a sci-fi action romance. Or you could check out my book Vigilance, my art book Monsters of the Multiverse. I've got a Teespring store with lots of posters and stuff. That probably showed on screen just now, and if any of it appealed to you, it's linked somewhere in the description. But besides that, that's all for today, except of course for ending this video on some kind of positive or inspiring note, and the thought I want to leave people with today is a quote I read a little while ago from Alex Hormozy, who said, "When you're making big life decisions, don't listen to the people closest to you. Listen to the people closest to your goal." There's a very good chance if you have a big dream or goal or ambition, the people closest to you may not have achieved something like that before and may think it's not possible just because they haven't done something like it. And they may discourage you from going after it, because in their reality it's not possible, but their reality doesn't have to define what your ultimate outcome is. I hope that's inspiring. I love you all, and I'll see you all in the next episode on Monday.